Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Money Talk. This is Gregg Somerville from Somerville Investments. Craig Snyder is taking this morning off. I want to thank everybody for coming out to our function. We had Danny Bader give a great motivational speech about vision, about some of his experiences, and I think we had some of my friends and clients and prospects, and Brian Cooney and Craig's clients, and Thomas Conity, I believe, is the lawyer who helped us sponsor it. So thanks to everybody who came out. It was a really good time, and we'll try to do something like that once a year and welcome everybody out. I want to mention just quickly that there was a jobs number that came out this morning that looks a little weaker than expected. Stock market's been kind of treading water to going down over the past few weeks after a big rally early in the year. And we'll circle back to that maybe towards the end of the show, and definitely next week we'll talk in more detail about interest rates. But I would expect the market to be a little bit choppy in here for several days. Interest rates seem to be coming down a little bit because the economy is a little bit weaker, and we'll circle back to that. But we have a special guest today, and I'm really excited. Karla Levinson is an elder care attorney, and elder care law and elder care financial management is something that I'm really trying to dig into and learn a lot more about as my clients and myself get closer to the ages where that's appropriate. Most of us have dealt with it in some way with our parents or with relatives, or certainly with friends, and sometimes ourselves. And Karla has helped me start to unlock this area a little bit more. I always say I'm pretty good at finding and identifying problems and issues in certain areas, but I'm not very good at solving them. So I like to have experts who I can rely on to really help me unravel some of this stuff. In the way of introduction, Karla is a lifelong resident of Wilmington, Delaware. She graduated cum laude with honors and distinction from the University of Delaware in 2002 with a Bachelor of Arts in both International Relations and Spanish. Karla received her law degree, magna cum laude, from Widener University of Law in 2007, where she was a member of the Law Review. Karla went into practice with her father, the late Larry Levinson. You may have heard him on this radio station once or twice, one of the premier attorneys in his field and the founder of the Levinson firm. I had heard of him when I first came to Delaware as the preeminent elder care attorney as well. I just hadn't stumbled into a lot of planning situations where I needed to reach out to somebody. Following Larry's passing in 2014, Karla assumed the role of managing attorney of the practice and has grown the business exponentially. Karla's been assisting clients with their elder law needs for over 11 years. She enjoys helping clients navigate through confusing aspects of elder law, finding long-term care options, and figuring out how to pay for them. Karla specializes in protecting hard-earned assets of Delaware seniors, Medicaid planning, and veterans benefits. In addition, she frequently speaks for professional groups in public regarding matters related to her area of practice. Karla was recently chosen by her peers as one of Delaware Today's top lawyers for the third year in a row. Karla and her husband, Alex Evers, have one son. So, Karla, with no further ado, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
No, that's very cool. And you also mentioned that you do some volunteer work as well, that you sit on certain boards. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Or
Sure. Well, right now I'm working with the Delaware's Combined Campaign for Justice. We're organizing a summer golf tournament to fundraise money for people who maybe can't afford an attorney. So that's a big push through the Bar Association.
I think we got to get that into the bio. I think we have to work that into the bio. So Karla and I met because there's a client that we both work with and care about, and she's helping us jump through some hoops and figure some sort of complicated issues out. But I thought I would just jump in with a few questions here of different areas and see if we can just sort of get a broad idea of what you do. And if somebody out there wants to reach out to Karla, I'm sure you can just Google Karla Levinson and it will come up, or Levinson Attorney. But if you want to give out your contact information,
sure,
you can do that. And anyone who's not having a pen or something, just reach out to me and I can get you in contact as well.
Yeah, so yes, you can certainly Google me, Karla Levinson. We should come right up. If you wanted to give us a call, it's 302-656-3393.
Okay. So also, as a further way of introduction, and again, we're going to have a few segments to get into the nitty gritty and the questions, but there's a part of Karla's website where she talks about who her clients are. And our clients are not millionaires. More often than not, they're people who worked hard for their whole lives to buy a home and save for retirement. The idea of paying $10,000 a month or more to a nursing home every month is terrifying and financially draining. This, on top of dealing with an illness or injury, can be crippling. So why don't we start there and talk about what's a typical client? And I know that there's a very broad range of clients, and from reading the profile, I think the person who we're working with is a little different from some of the people that you're working with. So talk about a typical situation of someone that you've helped recently that might be more of a typical profile of your clients.
Sure. So, I say I'm an elder law attorney, and people can, figure out that means working with the elderly, but just because you're elderly doesn't mean you need an elder law attorney. There's a few specific situations where it would be really, really important to consult with an elder law attorney. And one of the most typical situations I help people with is they call me. We call it a crisis situation where you have a spouse or a loved one who has maybe been in the hospital, is going through some rehabilitation in a rehab facility, and then the rehab facility says, okay, your Medicare coverage is getting cut off. The family realizes it's not safe for that person to go home, and the nursing home is saying, okay, next week we're going to need you to write us a check for about $10,000.
So why does the Medicare get cut off?
Medicare gets cut off so Medicare will only cover your stay in a skilled nursing facility for up to 100 days. The first 20 days in a facility are fully covered under Medicare. Days 21 to 100, there's a partial coverage. A lot of times supplemental insurance will cover it, but you're just doing rehab. So if you get to the point where the therapists are saying there's not really much more rehabbing we can do, but you're still having problems with your activities of daily living, you're having trouble getting in and out of bed, you need help getting to the bathroom, all those kinds of things, Medicare is not going to pay for that anymore.
So once you leave, let's say you leave the nursing home and you go back home, then your Medicare kicks back in?
There's a 60-day wait period for your Medicare coverage to kick back in.
So you don't have any coverage for 60 days, or you pay for
skilled nursing.
Okay,
the rehab.
But for everything else, Medicare stays in effect.
It's not like you.
Okay.
Yes.
So how would you help that person? So they come to you with this crisis, and they're freaking out, I would imagine. I mean, when people come to your office, they're like, okay.
Yes.
So first you calm them down.
Yes, I try.
There's no sedatives involved or anything.
No.
It's just human interaction is all you use to calm them down.
So many people ask we need to have a fully stocked bar in our office, but we don't yet.
Hey, soon you'll be able to have cannabis in your office.
Yes. So that typical person or family that we're dealing with. So and it's a little different in married couple, single people situation, but I'm just talking about a married couple. It'll be a husband and wife. Maybe they own their home outright. They have one or two cars, maybe some small retirement plans, but I'd say maybe total savings about $200,000 or $300,000, somewhere around there. Right. So what we can do is we can protect more money than they would be able to if they just went to the Medicaid office by themselves and said, I want to apply for Medicaid, do a financial determination and tell me, because Medicaid would tell a person like that, you have too much money to qualify, spend down X amount of dollars, and then come back and we'll kick in the Medicaid. If you see an elder law attorney, we can protect some of that money.
Okay. So when we come back, we got about 30 seconds left in this segment. I want to talk a little bit about the economics of protecting your assets from this standpoint. Number one, if someone has $200,000 or $300,000, there's going to be a little bit of a cost to work with you. And then I also want to say you weigh those two things against each other. How much can you save versus how much are they likely to pay without getting really specific, just sort of high cut. And then I want to talk a little bit about protecting assets that are a little bigger, which might be a little bit of a crossover between what we do and how do you think about long-term care insurance? And so when we come back, we have Karla Levinson. We'll be back in just a couple minutes. Welcome back to Money Talk. Gregg Somerville, usually along with Craig Snyder, but Craig Snyder took the day off. I never found out why he took the day off. I'm going to get that story and I'll share it with you next week. I'm sure he had a good reason. Maybe he was just exhausted from our function that we did with Danny Bader. We have Karla Levinson is joining us today for the full show, and we're covering a lot of ground with reference to elder care and the different types of clients she worked with. And one of the things we left off with was Karla said a typical client of hers might have a home that they paid for, might have a few $100,000 between personal and retirement assets. And if they just go into the Medicaid office, they're going to get a game plan, and it might not be the best game plan. And by consulting with an elder care attorney like Karla, there might be a better game plan to be held. And my question, one of my questions was, hey, if you only have a couple $100,000, it's going to cost you, I'm going to guess, a few $1,000s to work with a really good elder care attorney. And so how much might you save a person like that? I would imagine it would be a factor of many times whatever they're paying to you in most cases.
Yes. So what I like to impress upon people, because I know most of my clients have never been to an attorney before. It's scary, it's a scary thing. So I try to make people comfortable. But just again, this is just an example. This is not in every situation. But if someone has about $300,000 and they went to the Medicaid office is going to tell them that they can keep about $126,000 of that money.
Is that a Delaware state thing, or is that
That's a federal rule?
Okay.
Yes, that number changes every year. It goes up by a few $1,000s every year. So this year it's $126,420. Don't quote me on that.
Right.
But so the excess of that $300,000, the Medicaid office and the nursing home would just say, okay, spend the balance on nursing care. And when you've spent that, a couple, almost $200,000 on nursing care, then we'll kick in and pay.
When you're essentially down to their zero.
Yes.
That's what their zero
exactly.
is. Okay.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So that's literally. Your plan would be different from that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So fortunately in Delaware, the way the law works now in a married couple situation, we can protect almost all of that excess money. So, if you're at, your original question is like a cost benefit analysis.
Right.
So I explain it to people that for the cost of maybe 1 month, in the nursing home, we can protect, several $100,000.
Right. And that's good math.
Yes.
So the other question that I wrestle with in my practice a lot, and the result has been that I really haven't written any long-term care policies aside for my own and my mom's. And which is a little weird, because you would think if you think something's appropriate for yourself that you would have it with a lot of clients. But even the ones that I've bought and purchased, I'm somewhat conflicted on, because to get a really good policy, it represents, even if you have a pretty good income, a pretty big lien on your income. So I have in my head, I'm just going to throw out how I think about it, even though it hasn't really translated into my practice and covering people with these policies or business in that area, is that if you have less than $1 million and it's several $1,000s a year for the next 10, 15, 20 years, I just don't know that lien, because you're trying to generate income with that pool of money to supplement Social Security and maybe, if you're lucky, a pension. I just don't know that lien on your income is worth the protection, because also the protection is very rarely now for some unlimited amount of money. It's usually like a certain number of years for a certain number of assets. And that over $3 million, I kind of am like, well, you really can self-insure yourself, because if even if you spent $750,000, you're still leaving your kids a pretty good chunk of dough. And then I think where maybe it's appropriate is the $1 to $3 million. But even that seems super expensive to me. But I know I've seen the alternative, and the alternative's not good if you have like an Alzheimer's type thing or a long-term illness that doesn't really shorten the life of the afflicted person. So just however you want to talk about long-term care. And the economics of it is that fewer and fewer companies are providing it and are charging more and more, because I guess it was a real loser for them over the past 10, 15, 20 years. So talk about that however you think the best way to talk about that is. Sure.
So, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not qualified to give investment advice, but I tend to agree with you. What I have seen, and maybe I can ask you a question, Greg. The thing that if you are going to buy long-term care insurance, how do you feel about the money guard policies?
You know what? I need to learn more about them. I really do. And that's the big picture idea is that you basically keep money segmented in an account where you earn little or no interest. And I guess there's certain penalties for bailing out quickly. But when I said at the beginning of the show, I need to dig into this stuff more, I do need to dig into this stuff more. I've been to a couple of conferences or meetings about it, and I don't think I either fully understand it and I can't remember exactly what there were. There were a couple of things. Again, I guess the big picture thing is you'd have to take that money out of the pool. So if I get $1 million, I say, look, CFPs for a long time have said the amount that you can take out of $1 million if you're 65 and you have a 60-40 portfolio is 4%. So on $1 million, I think I can safely give you 4% over the course of your lifetime with a very, very tiny chance of you ever running out of money. So if I take $100,000 out of that and I put it into the MoneyGuard product, now I'm at 4% of $900,000. So that's the weight that I do. So I haven't written any MoneyGuard policies yet, but I should learn more about them and dig into them a little bit more.
So, without doing, it's your job to do the, crunch the numbers.
Right.
But the thing that seems attractive to me about that is at least you are not going to lose that investment if you don't use it. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, it's a very interesting product. And now there's also even more complicated products out there where they're tying care together with regular life insurance and different types of insurance policies. And I'm generally, I'd say, skeptical of insurance. So I really, if I'm going to use a product like that, I'm going to have to dig in a lot more over time. But no, that's always a good discussion to have. So let me bring up another kind of a weird aspect of this. And I guess this is an individual basis, but it's come up with my clients. What about the ethics of asset protection? Do you think about that much? Like, and this is what I mean by that, is that we work all our lives and we save, and then it really is, let's say it's me who's sick. If I'm sick and I'm protecting my assets, the society is paying for the care that I've built up this money to really pay for my care. That's why I saved them for retirement, and so somebody's paying for this care, and there is some people have an ethical problem with it. So how do you think about that?
Okay, great question. So first of all, I think that people have this misconception that we have all these millionaires are doing this asset protection planning to go on Medicaid. And that is just not the case. As you can see, or as I explained before, my typical client is one that has a couple $100,000. So, I understand where people are coming from. I also think that until you're in the situation, personally, you might have a different feeling about it. I also, no one has been able to explain to me in a convincing way what asset protection planning is any different than tax planning that rich people do to avoid paying taxes. And so my job as an elder law attorney is to advise my clients what the law is and what they're allowed to do.
And you're an advocate. You're supposed to be an advocate for that client.
Yes.
So in a big picture, if I was king of the world way, you're saying if you could wipe out all the offshore accounts and all of the complicated tax strategies that people use, then maybe you can come talk to me about this person who's been a longshoreman his whole life and saved $150,000.
Yes.
Okay, I'm on board with that. No, that sounds very good. Let's talk. We only have about a minute left in this segment, but let's just, I want to dig in a little bit to the specifics. And here's what I'll do. I'll tell what little I know in my one experience with the Miller Trust, and then I want to circle back to it because I think that's a really common one. So my dad was a New York City police officer and he lived in Florida, and he wasn't a good saver. That's a longer story for a different radio show. But he came up to Delaware when he was ill, and he spent a couple years in a nursing home, and he basically qualified for a Miller Trust, so where his police pension plus Social Security would go into an account. And they added up to like $1,300. The cost of Brandywine Nursing Home was $3,000 a month. So for his 2 or 3 years that he lived up here, they kicked in the $1,700. Brandywine was fine with it. We were fine with it. And he had enough money to throw money into the grandkids' cards. So when we come back, I'd love to have you dig in a little bit to the specifics of what type of situations that's appropriate for, how that works, what's the cost in setting stuff like that up. And then we'll just keep talking about different issues related to elder law. This is Gregg Somerville along with Karla Levinson. If you want to reach out to Karla Levinson, if you have a situation, just Google her name or get in contact with me through Somerville Investments. We'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to Money Talk. Gregg Somerville along with Karla Levinson. I wouldn't say she's sitting in with Craig, for Craig. I would just say Karla Levinson's our guest, and Craig is not around this week, so he'll be back next week, and we'll talk about dig into the stock market a little more. A little bit of a disappointing jobs number. I don't think GDP is quite exploding as people hoped it would. Market started out the year real well. Now seems to be treading water, giving back a little bit, but we'll circle back to that a little bit. Before we went to break, I talked about how I used an elder care planning strategy called the Miller Trust when my dad moved up from Florida. And his pension and Social Security went towards the nursing home care. And then the federal government kicked in half, and he had basically enough money to put a few dollars in a grandkid's birthday card or something like that, but not a whole lot more than that. But it worked. It actually worked very well. And in terms of like there wasn't much to protect there. But in terms of the ethics, it seems like, more and more, every time somebody talks about something like Medicaid or something like Miller Trust or something, everybody's like, we're marching towards socialism. And I'm just like, for that guy in that circumstance, that seems like a pretty reasonable way for society to help him end his life in dignity. He was in the Army, he was a cop, and I didn't, and not just, let's make believe he wasn't my dad. I just think like the people who speak like that should look at the programs, some of the programs we have, and you can interpret them as socialist programs if you want, but it's silly to think somebody shouldn't end that way. But going back to the mechanics of it, talk a little bit about how when you run into this, is it pretty frequent, and is that how it generally goes? Like, have the laws changed? This was 10 years ago when this all happened, or 15 years ago.
I was thinking it was a while ago, because when you said the nursing home was only $3,000 a month, I'm really bad at timelines, but no, I guess it probably was early 2000s. Okay, that would make sense, because when I started doing this, nursing homes were around 6,000.
Right.
And now they're 10 or 11. Anyway, so I wasn't going to talk about this, but since you kind of the way you talked about the Miller Trust and it's a march towards socialism. I haven't heard that one before.
That was very hyperbole.
But so the Miller Trust came into being because Delaware, and I think it's 12 other states, have income caps on Medicaid eligibility. And right now, for 2019, the income cap is $1,947 in gross monthly income. So that is a very low number if you think about it. So that means that if someone's income is over $1,947, they're not income eligible for Medicaid. So what was happening before there were Miller Trusts is that there were people who had no savings. They had exhausted all their money paying for nursing care. And because they were $2, $5, $10 over that $1,947 limit, they could never get Medicaid to pay for their nursing care.
Yikes.
So it was a problem for the person, but also for the nursing homes, because it's not like they had other money to pay.
Right.
So that's why that came into being. So it's really common.
And when did that come into being?
I don't know. Okay. It's been as long as I've been practicing. Okay. That's a good question. I should know the answer to that.
That's an untenable situation, obviously.
Right. So that's why we have the Miller Trust in the income cap states. And it's really common, even for clients who are otherwise eligible, they're over this income cap. So it's a really straightforward thing. It's a very routine thing that Medicaid applicants do.
And that's some people use you to do that.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. A lot of attorneys, actually not even elder law specialists, will do them because they're pretty basic. I just describe it as kind of a hoop you have to jump through to get your Medicaid. It's not really complex.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to shift directions a little bit. Do you help people evaluate nursing homes, or how do you in your description and I couldn't tell how deep you get into it, but how do you help people, number one, and then do you have any tips for people who are looking at them? Because I've talked to clients who are looking at different places, and I kind of am like, they both, the ones that they were talking about, I've heard good things about, but I don't really know, are there metrics? Is there a Yelp for these things? Is there how would you, if you were starting from ground zero, like today, I realize that I have to put my mom in a nursing home, or that it's best for her to be in a nursing home, and today's day one, what's your process?
Okay, that's a great question that we could talk for the whole radio show about. Okay. But just briefly, all right. So I don't give personal recommendations, because what could happen is we'll have a client come in who's in facility A. I have a morning client come in. They love facility A. Facility A is the greatest facility. The care is great. The staff is great. I'll have another client come in the afternoon who's at facility A, and it's a dump. They hate it. It's horrible. Right. So,
which is the same of schools,
right?
Doctors, financial advisors. Right. It's the same. I get it.
But as far as metrics go, the state does survey nursing homes. I think at least every other year, and you can find the ratings on CMS.gov. So there are ratings.
Wow.
Or survey results. So you can see that is one.
So the surveys are mandated.
Yes.
And they're surveys of the customers, of the clients?
No. So when I say survey, it's the state regulators come in unannounced.
More like inspection surveys.
Yes, they call it a survey. Yes, exactly. In order for them to receive federal funding, they have to submit to these surveys and be in compliance. So that's helpful. I also say, this is not a metric, but I think geographic proximity is really important, because the more you're there, the more you can advocate for your loved one.
Right.
I don't think Medicaid versus non-Medicaid facilities, I don't think there's a quality distinction there. Some people think a Medicaid facility.
I should have asked that question. Okay.
Yes.
What about availability of Medicaid beds? Is that an issue sometimes? At certain places?
Yes.
But would you say in general in Delaware, within earshot of this radio show, there are good Medicaid beds available most all the time?
Most of the time, yes. And you're more likely to get into a facility if you're coming from the hospital under Medicare rehab coverage that we talked about earlier, because
there's more money in it for them, because they're getting paid. Why? Are they getting double paid?
No, they're just getting the Medicare reimbursement rates are higher than the Medicaid reimbursement rates.
Oh, okay.
And but so if you can get into the facility you like under rehab, then they'll keep you on as a long-term resident. So that's kind of the way to get into the more popular facilities.
Got it. What happens, and I don't even know if you're going to know the answer to this one, but what happens when somebody doesn't have anybody? Like if there's just an old person and they're kind of like knocking on the door to dementia. One of the things a lot of times I'll be working with the husband and the husband passes away, and then I'm working with the widow. And I always try and figure out, so who do you rely on? Who do you talk to? Is there somebody who's looking out for you? Do you think they'd want to come to lunch with us and have a chat? Just to try to figure out, because honestly, I would feel like I own them if it went wrong, and I don't know how much or what I could do. But who, I just imagine, and I'm only working with people, in fairness, with a pretty good chunk of dough. So what happens to people who don't have anybody? Do they just show up at your door and then you kind of own them, or what happens? So
when you say show up at your door, are you talking about my door or the nursing home?
No, your legal door, and or somebody just a friend maybe. I don't know what the heck to do with you. I'm to elder care,
right?
Levinson, you win the lottery.
So. I will say that we do a lot of. We ask a lot of questions up front before we accept clients. So that is a really hard, sad situation for someone to be in. So the worst case scenario is the state has to get involved and place the person. But for some of my clients who don't have kids, there are a handful of agencies in Newcastle County where they will serve as an agent under the power of attorney. They'll serve as a guardian for, they're all fee-based, they're businesses, but that's worked out really well for some of my clients.
Okay. Well, good. So what else did I want to ask you? Quality of care. Okay. So I have now the last thing I did, and this might take a few minutes, but is I Googled some pretty specific questions. So I want to apologize in advance in case I'm ambushing you.
Yeah.
And we're not going to get to many of them in this segment, but we'll pick it up. Oh, I know which one was in here that I'm going to start off with. If somebody sues a nursing home and makes money, does that push them out? What if you, for miscare, does that push them out of Medicaid, or does the government get that money?
So
is there no motivation to sue? Because if you sue and you make money and you're just not going to get the money, is there any way to protect that money? And you have about 20 seconds to start your answer, and then we'll finish it as we go.
Good question. And I have two situations that I've had to deal with that. So I can talk about that.
I'd also like to find out about how common it is. Is it really common? Because you see these lawyers on TV and they're talking about it. So when we come back, we'll talk more about elder care with Karla Levinson. This is Gregg Somerville from Moneytalk. Back in a minute. Welcome back to Money Talk. Gregg Somerville along with Karla Levinson from the Levinson Law Firm, and she specializes in elder care and has joined us to talk about it's really turned out to be a very wide range of issues. And the most recent one we were talking about before the break was lawsuits against nursing homes. So there's certain ways that you have to qualify financially to qualify for Medicaid to pay for a nursing home. And my question was, if you sue the nursing home for malpractice or miscare or how you'd characterize it, and you get money, does that go to the state? Like, which would then, the purpose of lawsuits is to get people to change their behavior. So that might be an incentive not to sue, which means that you take that out of the equation in terms of trying to keep these nursing homes well run and ethical and honest. And so talk a little bit about that litigation and whether you get to keep the money and that kind of thing.
Sure. So good question. I've had two situations that come to mind that, so a short answer is yes, the money counts. So if you're on Medicaid, you cannot have more than $2,000 in assets. So if you get a personal injury settlement,
and
as
that's
a
what
result,
it would be. It's called a personal injury settlement. If you win a lawsuit
or you win
for the bed sore, whatever the stuff.
If you get a recovery, sorry, I should call it a recovery, right? Yep. So if you're awarded money as a result of some, negligence, right, that's an asset as far as Medicaid is concerned. So in two situations I've had, it hasn't been the nursing home, but I did have a client on Medicaid who got money in a legal malpractice case.
That was from before they qualified, or does it matter?
It doesn't matter. Okay. So they're receiving Medicaid. I saw, there was some legal malpractice. So they had a case and got, I think, about $100,000 from that. Right. So then what we had to do is we had to do asset protection planning with the money that they got in the lawsuit.
But isn't that, and we might be in the weeds here, but don't you need a 5-year look back for that? Or there's some stuff that you can do without a 5-year look back?
Right. So in a single person situation, which we didn't even get to, there is gifting and planning that we can do within the 5-year look back, depending on the amount of money.
So there's ways you may be able to protect part of the settlement.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we don't have to dig too deep because everyone is probably different from the other one.
Yes.
So the other thing, and I'm not even aware of this, but I'm just going to say, somebody asked this question on the internet: do I qualify for Medicaid's caretaker exemption if I took a 6-month break in caring for my parents? Before we get to that specific question, what is the Medicaid's caretaker exemption?
Sure. So the Medicaid caretaker exemption is one that comes up a lot. So Medicaid does have some protections in place for family members. So this particular one, Medicaid says if you have lived with and taken care of your parent for 2 years prior to them going into the nursing home, your parent can gift you the house. So basically, it's a public policy.
Regardless of the value of the house.
Regardless of the value of the house. It's a public policy determination where they're saying, okay, because you, for 2 years, kept your parents out of the nursing home and took care of them at home, we're going to let you continue to live there.
Do you have to prove that they were needing to go into the nursing home at the beginning of your 2-year stint taking care of them?
No.
They can just be older.
Yes, but you have to. So the regulation, and actually different states interpret it differently. Right, so I will say Delaware's pretty loose with it. I have not run into a lot of pushback.
No one can.
I have not ever had a situation. You do have to provide 3 letters, caregiver affidavits that.
And that house doesn't count against any of the other minimums, like the asset minimums.
Right.
That's a huge planning tool.
It's great. Yes.
And I bet there's people who lived in their house with their mother for the 2 years and didn't know about that and didn't take advantage of it.
Probably. Yeah.
Probably. Wow.
Yeah. So.
That's a big one. So how about this specific question? Do I qualify for Medicaid's caretaker exemption if I took a 6-month break in caring for my parents? So I was there for a year. I went away for 6 months. I came back and cared for a year.
Right. I would say no, but, there's always the argument. And, that would definitely be a gray area, not a slam dunk.
Do we have to report my father's house on Medicaid estate recovery form if he transferred it to his wife?
So we don't have, I'll just say, answer that question. Basically, if you're a married couple and the healthy spouse is living in the house is exempt from Medicaid accountability. So
okay, so that kind of takes that out. Okay. Can my mother-in-law sell her house and buy a new house with us without affecting her Medicaid eligibility? That
depends on how you're going to title it. That's a very complicated
you're going to have to dig in and know a lot more.
Yeah.
Okay. Can Medicare force a senior who falls a lot at home into a nursing home?
Can they force them into a nursing home?
Yeah, these are pretty wacky,
I wouldn't say that you can't really force anyone unless, Adult Protective Services comes and determines it's not safe for you to live at home anymore.
Can an ex-spouse receive spousal support payments from a Medicaid recipient?
Yes. So I'm assuming it's alimony.
Right.
Alimony. Yeah, you'll still receive your alimony. Yes.
So the alimony is segmented out. That's not counted against the...
So I had one situation where a spouse was receiving alimony. I think we did have to go to court and modify the court order. So I don't remember.
Which that happens sometimes just when somebody's circumstances change.
Right.
Alimony changes when somebody's
right.
So that was the kind of thing, and this was the reason that they did
yes.
it. These are all pretty specific. Can I convert a revocable trust to an irrevocable trust when I apply for Medicaid? That's like a 5-year
not
look
really
back
right
thing, probably, right?
Let me just say that's a big one. A lot of people think if they have a revocable trust that's going to protect their assets from Medicaid, and that is not the case.
Because the idea is you have to give up complete control of the money.
Yes.
So talk a little bit, last few minutes here, we got about 3 minutes. Talk a little bit about that tool, creating an irrevocable trust to protect your assets.
Sure.
And one of the risks of that tool is that the person you trust most in the world can do whatever they want with that money, because the idea is that you're truly giving up control of that money.
Yes.
And that's why the federal government is going to come in and help you out.
Right.
So just talk a little bit about that
Sure.
tool.
So, 75% of my clients come and see me in a crisis.
Right.
So most people are not coming to plan ahead. Although I encourage everyone to do that. So about 25% of my clients come and see me with a nice lead time. So if we have a lead time of 5 years or more, we can look at whether it makes sense to take assets and put them into an irrevocable trust. So, and basically, like Gregg was saying, you are giving up control of those assets, but after 5 years, those assets do not have to be reported on your Medicaid application. This is really works really well. A lot of times for people who have like a second home and they don't want to have to sell that home,
right?
Like a beach house, or just a nest egg investment account that they think they won't ever need to touch except for an emergency.
And this would also be somebody who you'd expect to be in a nursing home for well past the 5 years.
Yes, right. A long life expectancy. Yes.
Right. Okay. And it's really important in this circumstance, if it's applicable to you, to get that clock ticking.
Yes.
Because the more time you have.
Time is money.
Yeah, time is money. Because every month that you push it back, that's another month of care that you're likely going to be saddled with. So anything, if you could give tips to anybody else out there about when to use it in an elder care attorney, what would be some of the other circumstances? We got about a minute and a half left, and then we'll again let people know how to contact you.
Sure. I would say the biggest thing is if you are diagnosed with some kind of chronic condition, so that would be MS, Parkinson's, dementia, you're statistically a lot more likely to need long-term care. So if any of those things happen to you, it would be really important to make sure you get your ducks in a row as soon as possible.
Okay. And then the crisis point. So what's a trigger there?
That would be if your spouse or a loved one is in a nursing home and it looks like they're not going to be able to go home ever, and you're starting to have to pay out of pocket for that nursing facility.
I would just add my 2 cents is that it's never too soon to consult an elder care attorney, and it's also always better to go to an assisted care place a little too early than to wait too late when your choices might be restricted and where you might be under more stress in making that decision. Hey, thanks. I want to thank Karla Levinson for joining us this week. It's really been super informative for me. I hope it's been informative for the listeners as well. If you want to reach out to Karla Levinson, you can do it through me. Go to somervilleinvestments.com and I'll get you in contact. Google Karla Levinson, or Karla, why don't you give out your contact information and we'll sign off with that.
The easiest is the phone number, 302-656-3393.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us on Money Talk this week. I'll be back next week with Gregg Snyder.